Usually, when I start talking about the issue of life after death with people who haven't yet encountered the knowledge I present, they immediately bombard me with various slogans ingrained over the years, aimed at ending the topic as quickly as possible. Some become quite nervous, even aggressive, because they know virtually nothing about the subject and fear appearing ignorant. Others behave as if even discussing death might inevitably bring it upon them. They cling tightly to that small piece of reality called everyday life on Earth, which seems safe, familiar, and almost entirely explored by scientists. Meanwhile, death can come at any moment. Isn't it worth getting to know this phenomenon better, trying to understand it, preparing for it appropriately? When you know you have a challenging mountain expedition ahead of you, do you embark on it without any preparation, assuming that whatever happens will happen? Do you know anyone who has lived on Earth in the same body for hundreds or thousands of years simply by avoiding the topic of death? There is a saying, whoever is not ready to die is not ready to live. And how can you know how to live and what is truly important in your life if you don't know its true meaning or whether death of the body really ends it? One of the slogans that people often try to silence me with is something like, no one has returned from the other side, so we don't know what it's like there or if anything exists after death at all. I then ask such a person how they know that no one has returned. How do they know that no genuine contact has ever been established with someone who has crossed to the other side or returned to their body? Where did they find the information on which they base their assumption? And have they ever sought it out? Have they thoroughly reviewed the available knowledge? And if so, which specific areas? On what sources do they base their assertion? As you might guess, it quickly becomes clear that such a person hasn't lifted a finger to verify their assumption in any way, and is merely repeating cliches they've uncritically accepted as truth. At this point, I must interject that I deeply regret that, despite living in an era of widespread access to information, a relatively small part of society takes full advantage of this privilege. Most people rely on mainstream media, which, while serving up some information without requiring the effort of seeking it out, meticulously tailor and select it so that the recipient only receives what the owner of that medium deems appropriate. But let's return to the issue of life after death. Are there reliable sources of information on this topic? Any evidence that could help us answer the question of what happens to us when our body dies? As I mentioned, most religions and beliefs from all corners of the world proclaim that after the death of the body, a person continues to live as an immaterial being, called a soul, spirit, or simply consciousness. However, the problem with these beliefs is that descriptions of the afterlife or the process of dying and transitioning to it are imprecise, even fragmentary. They don't describe exactly what you'll experience at the moment of death and immediately afterward, or they do so in a very metaphorical, even mythological way. They provide no clear guidelines on how you should behave when that moment comes. The exception might be dharmic religions, where this issue is presented in much more detail than in others. By dharmic religions, I mean those cults based on dharma. This term has many meanings, but in general, it could be defined as the fundamental laws governing the world. Dharmic religions include Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Ajivika. Unfortunately, a common feature of all popular religious cults is the claim that when our earthly body dies, as immaterial beings, we have practically no influence over what happens to us next. This is determined by our concluded earthly life, previous incarnations, our experiences, interactions with other beings, our personality, and character. Whether some supernatural force called a god or deity casts us into a world where we will suffer again, or one that resembles the so-called heavenly world, depends on what we are like during our earthly life. According to these beliefs, we must submit to this force and rely on its mercy. Dharmic religions also teach that after the death of one body, we reincarnate into another, not necessarily human. It could be, for example, an animal body. What exactly it will be like also depends on those previous lives. In this process, we don't have much to say either, as a higher force will impose the next incarnation on us if it turns out we haven't achieved a sufficient level of consciousness to leave the circle of reincarnation. According to the followers of these beliefs, the solution to this problem is living according to dharmic principles and practicing various activities aimed at achieving enlightenment, nirvana. It's quite difficult to describe what this state is. I think it could be defined as realizing one's oneness with the universe. Unfortunately, as they themselves claim, it is not easy, and few succeed. Therefore, this process usually takes several incarnations, and as a result, another incarnation is necessary. At this point, many of you have probably thought, hold on, but how do we even know that reincarnation or life after death exists at all? You haven't presented any evidence, and religious claims might be false, and after death we might just cease to exist. Let's move on to the evidence then. I'll start with reincarnation. Beyond sources from various religions and cults, there are also accounts from contemporary people whose experiences clearly indicate that our earthly existence in a physical body is just a brief episode in our true, eternal life. One such group is children who vividly remember their previous incarnations. These types of stories occur all over the world, and there are enough of them that no truth seeker should pass them by lightly. This phenomenon involves very young children suddenly beginning to tell their parents about who they were in a past life. They describe themselves, their place of residence, various stories from their lives, and often the moment of their own death. Many adults dismiss these stories as the result of an overactive imagination in their little ones, ignoring them. However, those with more open minds often take a closer look. It then turns out that the child provides information that matches reality, which they couldn't have known due to their young age or limited access to such information. Sometimes, the child's previous incarnation lived in the same town, allowing the child to precisely point out the house where they lived and describe its interior in detail, even though they had never been there in their current life. If you haven't encountered this topic, I suggest catching up. I recommend the work of Professor Ian Stevenson, who studied such cases. Out of about 3,000 analyzed cases, he managed to confirm in over half of them that the children were indeed talking about people who once lived and in different parts of the world. As you delve into this topic yourself, you will certainly come across the destructive disinformation spread by people who claim that all these stories are lies. So far, however, I have not encountered any counter-theory from them that explains this phenomenon in any other way. These individuals stick to the version that all such stories were simply fabricated. Yes, some of them might indeed be fantasy. Some may have been deliberately concocted to later be debunked as false in mainstream media, which would automatically discredit or ridicule all others. But that way, you could try to discredit almost anything. Accusing someone of fabrication without concrete evidence is despicable, and a true seeker of truth should not be swayed by such tactics. The abundance of these stories and the fact that a professor of psychiatry confirmed many of them constitutes undeniable evidence that reincarnation is a fact. As a result, after the death of our physical body, we still exist. I'll discuss why most of us don't remember our previous incarnations and the laws governing the so-called circle of reincarnation another time. Another type of event providing evidence that we continue to live after the death of our physical body is the phenomenon known as clinical death experiences, also referred to as NDE, near-death experiences. I'll briefly describe them here, encouraging you to explore the topic further, for example, by reading the publications of American psychologist and physician Raymond Moody, who conducted extensive research on them. The phenomenon occurs when the physical body dies, and the deceased person leaves it and begins to observe their surroundings as an immaterial being. At that moment, they can accurately see what is happening, for example, at the accident scene or in the operating room. People who have experienced such situations describe with incredible precision the people present and the events unfolding around their temporarily deceased body. Temporarily, because such a phenomenon differs from death in that, after a moment, the person returns to physical life and their body regains vital functions. For the living participants in such an event, the whole experience might last only a short time, while the temporarily deceased may perceive it as lasting a very long period. This happens because the person experiencing clinical death is usually not just near their dead body. They move through immaterial worlds where time, as such, does not exist. As an immaterial being, they may experience many events, even feeling as if they lasted for months or years. Skeptics firmly claim that the issues raised are merely brain projections with nothing to do with any spirituality or metaphysics. As usual, however, their explanations seem very ignorant, even forced, because during an NDE, the person's brain undergoing such an event is dead. It shows no activity and thus cannot create such experiences. Usually, patients experiencing NDE were already unconscious or dead when they arrived in the operating room. They couldn't have seen the people or objects present there. Yet after returning to their bodies, they could describe everything in detail, and from a perspective as if they were nearby or looking at the whole event while floating in the air. How then could a dead brain, unable to open its eyes, perceive and store in memory the events unfolding around it? Allow me now to quote a few excerpts from NDE experiences from Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, so that you have a more accurate picture of them. It was 2 years ago. I had just turned 19. I was driving my friend home in my car, and when I came to an intersection in the center, I stopped and looked both ways, but nothing was coming. So I drove into the intersection, and at that moment, I heard my friend's terrified scream. Suddenly, I saw the headlights of a car speeding straight toward us. I heard a terrible crash. My car was smashed, and I found myself in darkness, in a closed space. It all happened very quickly. Then, it was as if I was floating about 5 yards above the street, about 5 yards from the car. I heard the fading sound of the crash. I saw people running over and gathering around. My friend got out of the car, apparently in shock. I saw my body in the wrecked car among those strangers, and I saw them trying to get me out. My legs were twisted, and everything was covered in blood. Another description. About a year ago, I was admitted to the hospital due to heart disease. The next day, lying in bed, I began to feel very severe chest pain. I pressed the button by the bed to call the nurses. They came running and started attending to me. It was uncomfortable lying on my back, so I turned over. And when I did, I stopped breathing and my heart stopped. Then I heard the nurses shout, "She's dying! She's dying!" At that same moment, I felt myself leave my body, sliding off the mattress, under the side rail of the bed, almost as if I slipped through that rail, and slid to the floor. Then I began to slowly rise. As this was happening to me, I saw more nurses rush into the room. There were probably a dozen of them. My doctor was making his rounds, so they called him. He came in, and I thought, I wonder what he's going to do now. I floated past the table. I saw it from the side very clearly, rose up to the ceiling and stopped, looking down. I felt like a piece of paper blown upward. From there, I watched as they tried to resuscitate me. My body lay down below, stretched out. I could see it clearly, and they were all standing around. I heard one of the nurses say, "Oh God, she's dead," while another bent down to give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I clearly saw the back of her head. I'll never forget her hair. It was cut short. Then I saw them wheel in some machine that caused chest compressions. They turned on the machine and I saw my body jump on the bed, and I heard every bone crack. It was awful. As I watched them massage my chest and rub my arms and legs, I thought, why are they bothering? I'm fine. Finally, let me add an excerpt where Dr. Moody created a description of an NDE based on the common elements shared by his patients' experiences. A person dies, and when they are at the point of greatest physical distress, they hear the doctor pronouncing them dead. Then they begin to hear an uncomfortable noise, a loud ringing or buzzing, and at the same time, they feel themselves moving very rapidly through a long, dark tunnel. After this, they suddenly find themselves outside of their physical body, but still in the immediate physical environment, and they see their own body from a distance, as if they were a spectator in a theater. They are in a state of emotional upheaval, observing the efforts to resuscitate their body. After a while, they collect themselves and become more accustomed to their odd situation. They notice that they still have a body, but one of a very different nature, and endowed with different powers than the physical body they left behind. Soon, other things begin to happen. They notice that others are coming to meet and help them. They see the spirits of relatives and friends who have already died, and a loving, warm spirit of a kind they have never encountered before. A being of light appears before them. This being wordlessly asks them to evaluate their life and helps them by showing a panoramic, instantaneous playback of the major events of their life. At some point, they find themselves approaching some sort of barrier or border, apparently representing the divide between earthly life and the next life. However, they find that they must go back to the earth, that the time for their death has not yet come. They resist this, for by now they are taken up with their feelings of joy, love, and peace, and they do not want to return. They do, however, reunite with their physical body and live. Later, they try to tell others about their experience, but they encounter difficulties. In the first place, they have trouble finding human words adequate to describe these unearthly episodes. They also find that others scoff, so they stop telling other people. Still, the experience affects their lives profoundly, especially their views about death and its relationship to life. There are truly countless descriptions like these, both in other publications and available online on various forums or websites. Over the years, I have also collected many such accounts from people with whom I had the pleasure of discussing their own NDE experiences. I'll try to publish them on this channel. Most of these stories share several common elements. The most important is the feeling of bliss and relief after losing the body, as well as a reluctance to return to it. However, there is also considerable disorientation caused by the persistent incarnational amnesia, because when incarnating into a new body and being born in it, the memory of this fact or previous incarnations is temporarily erased. In a large number of descriptions, there are some luminous beings from whom one can obtain information about the current state and future events. However, there are also quite dark descriptions where people experiencing NDE find themselves in low-vibration worlds where they endure moments of horror. Another strong proof of life after death is provided by the phenomenon of the most outstanding, still-living Polish clairvoyant, Krzysztof Jackowski. I suspect that many of you, upon hearing the word clairvoyant, already feel a strong urge to turn off this video. That word is associated with various charlatans whose visions rarely find any confirmation in reality. And yes, such people should be approached with great caution or limited trust. At the same time, without prejudice or ignorance, as one cannot automatically assume that all without exception are frauds. And that's why I decided to mention Krzysztof Jackowski, as his case is truly exceptional. Through traditional media, social media portals, and especially his channel on YouTube, he occasionally presents his visions regarding the future. And although not all of them have been confirmed, at least not yet, he has several spectacular predictions to his credit, whose truthfulness and accuracy cannot be denied. However, that is not Mr. Krzysztof's specialty, and I won't focus on that in this video. What Mr. Jackowski has mastered and where he has no equal is in locating deceased people, or rather their bodies. If you've never heard of this, you might now think it's just his boasting, allegedly confirmed by false testimonies from collaborating stand-ins. But nothing could be further from the truth. Mr. Jackowski has been gathering for many years confirmations from the police that he indeed pinpointed the location of missing persons' bodies with great accuracy. Such documents can no longer be disputed, can they? So how is it possible? How can one pinpoint the location of a body with such precision, being tens or hundreds of kilometers away from it? The entire process looks something like this. Mr. Jackowski receives both photographs and personal belongings of the missing person, as these items are saturated with the energy of these individuals. Mr. Krzysztof examines, touches, and even smells them, trying to feel and tune in to that energy to establish contact with the sought-after individual, who for various reasons has already abandoned their dead body and is now in an immaterial dimension. Once that succeeds, a mental-spiritual interaction with that person occurs, during which Mr. Jackowski asks them to indicate the location of their remains. He then receives what he calls feelings, which are various types of information transmitted by the sought-after individual, usually words, sentences, images, or emotions. Often, the visions are so precise that he can almost see through the eyes of the person just before the death of their physical body. As a result, Krzysztof Jackowski can not only precisely pinpoint the location of the body on a map, but also determine the circumstances in which the death occurred. As you can see, this man's work is irrefutable evidence that we continue to exist after the death of our physical body. Mr. Jackowski himself has no doubt about this and constantly emphasizes it in his appearances. So if we continue to live after the death of our body, where do we end up? I'll tell you more about that in subsequent videos. I also encourage you to read my publication, in which I have compiled all the knowledge I've acquired over the years about life after death. In this video, I used excerpts from it. Thanks to it, you'll learn what the moment of your death will be like and discover ways to cope with situations that may arise at that time. You'll stop fearing the death of your physical body and will handle the deaths of others much better. You'll be able to use this knowledge to comfort and calm your dying loved ones. You'll gain tremendous detachment from your current earthly existence, which will free you from daily fears and allow you to enjoy life. You'll look at problems differently and deal with them much faster. You'll learn who you really are and who you thought you were. You'll discover what the surrounding reality truly is. You'll understand the meaning of your life. You'll learn what dreams really are. You'll acquire skills that will allow you to conduct your own research on life beyond the physical body. Thank you for your time, and see you next time.